Okay, so everyone, you're very welcome, as I said, to our first nutrition webinar of the year, in partnership with the National Dairy Council. So we're delighted to start off today with Daniel, who a lot of you will be familiar with from his work on with different teams such as the Dublin Footballers, Leinster Rugby, to name a couple, along with his online company and company in person, should I say, in Davey Nutrition. So I'm not going to delay it too long. I just really quickly want to remind people, I suppose, of some of the benefits that becomes with being a reps member. So if that screen will change, yeah. So just again, a quick reminder that there is discount available for members through the SkillNet, through the Leisure Health and Fitness SkillNet. So courses you see or seminars, exhibitions you see coming up, check in with us to see can you avail of discounts or to CPD professional development. Please, there's funding there available, so don't be afraid to query with us. The portability obviously allows people to travel to countries around the world with a letter of portability from ourselves if you are a REPS member. So again, anyone looking to travel and work abroad, just check in with us in advance to see can you bring the REPS accreditation with you to help with employment. We have links with insurance companies on cheaper insurance, whether that be for your facility or yourself. So again, link in and we can provide you with information. There is a good bit on the website already, on the Reps Ireland website, for you to take forward with you. We have the directory online where qualified reps members, there's a directory there of different areas around the country which are qualifications on that. Do feel free to add in more information. The more information you have on it, the better, obviously, for yourselves. If you're looking to be contactable, you can also include that information. There is a couple of things coming up. The Fitness and Wellness Summit we've partnered with, which is in the Helix and DCU next month, at the end of this month, I think, actually. And there is some discounted tickets available still for that. So if you're interested in attending, just reach out to us and we can support you. I suppose the big thing with reps, and I've just come into the role as reps registrar since the start of the year, is we're looking, I suppose, to create more opportunities for people in the area and get more education providers on board with us as reps approved education providers. And I suppose the national quality standard with the leisure, health and fitness industry is a big part of that, where we're striving to improve the quality standard across the industry. And more facilities and centres are coming on board where they're looking to hire reps approved trainers. So we do see that as a key benefit that we want to stay pushing to improve the quality across the industry. Social media is kind of where a lot of our information goes out through Instagram and Facebook. We have to set up a WhatsApp channel, which might make information easier to share if you're an education provider yourself through WhatsApp groups or just through friends. So that can be found online as well. Okay, without further ado, I'm going to introduce Daniel and let him kick off. We will pause every 7 or 8 minutes for some questions, where if you want to pop it into the chat, we'll keep an eye on it. But also, if you want to raise your hand, Daniel prefer to hear a voice. So if you can raise your hand, we'll unmute you and you can pose the question. And we should be kind of wrapped up by 1 o'clock or so. And we will share a recording if anyone wants to link in with us after the hour. Okay, that's enough for me. Daniel, take it away.
Thanks very much, Alan, and thanks for having me. So as Alan was saying, like, my ideal scenario here is that we get a bit of conversation going and there's a bit of engagement. I don't want to be looking at my slides for the next hour and talking into my own ears. So, Alan, I'm going to, if I'm not getting questions, I'm going to be having a conversation with you as we roll through. So I've thought a lot about today's hopefully conversation and what we all want to do when we work in the space of health or performance is that we want people to feel better and we want people to have a better understanding of the value of exercise and the key things, the key habits in the way that they live their lives. but the communication of these concepts, whether it be science or habits or behavior change, is an art form. And you know, I've made so many mistakes myself, and what it's all about is trying to learn from your mistakes. So as Alan mentioned, I've worked in professional sport since 2012. I've been involved in teams mainly, the likes of Dublin and Leinster, but now I'm out on my own. And I can honestly say that the deepest learning that I've had about business, about, as I said, the art of communication, has come particularly in the last 18 months, where I'm not working within an environment where I'm seeing people every day, and you're trying to, it's a lot easier to change certain behaviors and help people understand simple concepts if you're seeing them all the time. There could be 6 weeks for me as a practitioner, there could be 6 weeks between when I see people, and you're trying to impact them as much as you possibly can. So my philosophy, again, because I still do talks, I still do sessions like this, webinars. My philosophy is about helping people to understand what they know and implement what they know, not telling people what to do. And if you can get people to buy into that concept of implementing things that they already know consistently, particularly in this type of situation where I'm not seeing people all the time, it's far easier. So my business is one-to-one and one-to-many, because we do courses and we do lots of different types of programs. And the health space, I mean, ultimately what drives me every day is trying to some way improve people's health or performance. That's my purpose. But in order to become as effective as you want to be in your role, you have to think about things really holistically. And you need to go through a bit of a journey yourself and be very clear about what your message is, what your philosophy is, and how you communicate around your philosophy. So today's session is much more about the communication of what's important and what actually impacts people, and how we can ultimately allow people to be a little bit more confident and clear in this space. Because one of the things we've tracked in my own business are people's language, and we call it the change in language from our interventions. So from our support and from our insights and from access to information and guidance, what happens is that people's language begins to change in what their perception of good health is and what good habits look like. So how do you make that really simple, and how do you get people onto that journey? Is by meeting them where they're at. But one of the biggest things that comes out of it is I feel more confident. I feel more clear now. And we live in a world where there's a huge amount of confusion and there's an enormous amount of contradiction. You know, even if I think about my own practice and how much it's evolved, I would slap myself for some of the things I might have said 10 years ago. And that's the reality, but you got to acknowledge that there is that evolution in your own understanding. But if you don't have a clear philosophy, and if you just, you know, ask yourself that question now within your own discipline, what is your philosophy? What would you describe if you were to, you know, you just tell somebody now, this is my philosophy and how I coach, or this is my exercise philosophy, what is it? So ours in Davey Nutrition is about a holistic approach to nutrition and performance. And it is recognizing that you need a very, very clear picture of what you're working towards, and to base that on the scientific pillars of exercise, nutrition, mindset, and sleep. It's really simple, but we want people to understand that, and the journey is implementing sustainable habits. So that's what people will get from us. So our values that lead us and that we try and base all of our communication on is evidence, practice, and fun. If it's not evidence-based, then we can't have integrity around what we're saying. If it's not practical, it won't be implemented. And if it's not fun, people won't enjoy it. And enjoyment is strongly linked with the implementation of things. So it allows you to be very clear. And the more clear you are, then people respond to that, because they can see your understanding of your space or what you're trying to communicate is far more effective and meaningful. So 360, I'll talk a little bit about stress and lifestyle, expectations, knowledge, and knowledge versus what people do. So knowledge versus practice, the amount of misunderstanding. We'll talk a little bit about the science around things that are very, very topical, whether it be things like intermittent fasting, dairy products. I mean, this is sponsored by the National Dairy Council, so we're going to talk a little bit about dairy and where it sits. Simplicity, bring it together in your own message. So as I said, everything is about building a really strong foundation around these kind of key pillars, and mindset is what pulls it all together. So, you know, what I find so fascinating about my world is that what I would love to talk to you about today is very different to what we are going to talk about. I would love to get into the detail around certain nutrition concepts. And, you know, if there's questions around that, that's absolutely fine. But where I really feel the value is not, again, the depth of your own knowledge, but what people can learn from you. So it's very important to understand things with great depth yourself. But if you want to communicate simple things really effectively, then you need to be very clear about your understanding of them. But the reason I shared this, and this is my first book, is just look at the simplicity of the food philosophy, which was presented in the book. So the value of food being a ritual or a habit that you would create homes, and that if we do that, then we provide ourselves and our bodies with the key nutrients. I believe in cooking. I believe in the preparation of your own food. I believe that if you're not in control of that, then you're less likely to be consistent. I believe that there should be a sharing and a social element. And then while I actually like to enjoy debates with my team and other scientists or other nutritionists, I enjoy a debate around a topic of nutrition. Debating nutrition science in the public arena doesn't always result in better clarity for people. So it's about translating science into simplicity. So it's about, this is the kind of the approach or the strategy. It's knowledge. You're trying to improve people's knowledge so that they know what to do and why to do it. And if they have a good, clear picture as to why, if they understand a piece of information more, they're more likely to buy into it. And if I'm speaking to a group, it doesn't matter what group it is, I usually pick the simplest message that's out there around nutrition, and that is portions of fruit and vegetables, and how quickly people run out of reasons why variety is important, and how easy it then is to give them a little bit more depth to the value of variety. So people will think about nutrients, and then they'll think about energy might come up, but how quickly that understanding of the value, when you communicate that it's the bare minimum that's required to provide you with the key nutrients, and then the value of fiber and the knock-on potential benefits to the microbiome, to your gut health, and how that might affect your immunity and your mood and your energy, you start to give people a deeper understanding of the value of variety. You can be sure people's variety is going to be more consistent. So then you need the skills in order to do it. You know, is it in a smoothie? Is it in soup? Is it in your breakfast? Is it in your lunch and your dinner? How is it coming through to form better habits? And of course, you need to want to. And we might talk a little bit about that. You know, maybe some people have their own experiences on this, but a major determining factor for success is being ready and wanting help. And I think being in this industry, an awful lot of your skills will depend on perceiving where people are in their journey. How ready are people to take on the information? And that ability will also allow you to give them the right level of information. So it's I'm not making any assumptions here about your own practice, but go back to my own. It's not about the over delivery of complicated matters. It's not about your knowledge, and it's not about telling people information if they don't want it. While you might think it's really important, why I might feel it's really important, if they don't want to know it, you're better off trying to keep them engaged in the why, and engaged in at a level that they will remain consistent, and keeping the fun and the practical side of it. So an awful lot of this stuff, I'm sure you will have thought about or will have considered. But what I love about this space is that no matter how many times I think about it, or no matter how many times I have a conversation about these things with my team, we all come back to how can we communicate around these concepts more effectively. And it's that repetition that allows you around these concepts, that allows you to become better at it. So one of the biggest things that I have learned in the past, I'll actually stick to it. I won't go beyond the last 2 years, is that in the general population, stress is a major factor in decision making. And we live in a highly challenging, stressful world. Some of us don't, but a lot of our clients do. And stress is something that is presented quite often in something that's a challenge or a barrier for consistency. And I think it's how stress is positioned is really important. We need to be able to communicate that stress is something that's inevitable, where our bodies are designed to have stress systems in order to protect us. And we need a certain amount of stress. So it's not the eradication of stress, it's the management of stress. But if you can have, and you don't need to be, and I guess this is a key message, I don't want to jump too far ahead. You don't need to be a psychologist. You don't need to be a doctor. You don't need to be a nutritionist to have a conversation within the space of stress, or in the space of exercise, or even physiotherapy. But you can help to facilitate a conversation within these spaces for people, as long as you're very clear about your boundaries. So when I talk about stress, it's a very general conversation about people thinking about what is influencing your decisions. And it is about getting people to think for them, in relation to their lives, what helps to manage stress. So when you break down the part of what influences people's decisions when it comes to health or nutrition decisions, I have seen a huge correlation between fatigue and stress. So people are tired because they haven't slept well. That impacts their decisions around food, how they feel, their mood, and then their ability to deal with difficult moments in their day. It could be a fight with a loved one. It could be something that happens at work, leads to a more automated or automatic response around the decisions they make. They may very easily decide not to train or exercise rather than training or exercise, or they may decide to have something quick on the way home from work rather than making something that is exactly what they need to do. They need to cook, and they need to do that piece of exercise, or they need to walk. But unless somebody understands that emotion and understands where that's being driven from, then they won't be able to deal with that moment. So rather than dealing with their problems, it's asking those questions about how can you better, how did you feel? I mean, that's an unbelievably powerful question to ask somebody. How did they feel by not exercising? How do they feel by exercising? How do they feel by eating that bar of chocolate? How do they feel if they made something themselves, like a homemade snack? And what happens is that you help people to build a better understanding of themselves by having a conversation that's open, and that's not, I don't need to break down the nutritional components of a bar of chocolate in order for them to see that wasn't the decision that they needed to make. And I'm not putting any percentages on it, but I would say certainly more than 80% of my conversation with people is about these type of things, the way that people live their lives. Yeah, of course, somebody wants to go to the Olympics, or somebody is, performance is an absolute, like their key goal, then you need to become very, very specific and understand things. But by and large, it's how people live their lives, and it's putting a little bit more structure on it that allows people to build more and more consistency. Which was really interesting that Alan mentioned routine. When I asked him how he's getting on, he's able to identify the routine element, and people can. But what is that routine? And it is the depth in the conversation. That's the next step that we would have gone into it. What does that routine look like? And why is that routine working? And it's the same around exercise, the same around sleep, it's around nutrition. It's facilitating that conversation. So I don't know how long I've spoken for, but probably more than 7 or 8 minutes. Are there any questions?
Feel free to raise your hand, folks, and we can unmute you to speak, or pop one into the chat. While we're giving that a minute, I suppose I'm conscious of our attendees and them being in working with clients or athletes where that conversation is happening and people are chasing weight loss, and maybe they're trying for performance and weight loss at the same time, and the challenge of that, trying to be at the peak of your powers on both fronts. And again, the off season obviously would probably be, I'm dealing with a couple of athletes at the minute trying to lose weight, but also dual club players, and want to be fueling adequately, but also losing body fat. The conversation that happens with those, and the realistic conversations, that it's not going to happen as quickly as they might like if they're fueling adequately. Any tips on how that conversation might go, and giving them, I suppose, bringing them back to reality a small bit?
Yeah, that's a good question, and one I've had many, many, many times. And I think the reason why I enjoyed working in elite sports so much is because the goals are so clearly outlined, and the phases of the season are so clearly outlined when you're working with a group like that. So you mentioned the off season, you mentioned the preseason, and identifying the phases in the year that allow people to go after specific goals. So it comes down to mindset and clarity, going back to the whole point that I started with, that's what you're trying to enable people with. When you think about performance, if you want to perform at your best, every decision day to day, week to week, needs to have your performance as your priority or in mind. So that means that if you want to perform at your best, then you need to eat adequate amounts of calories to perform. So in very simple terms, that means calorie balance at the very minimum. It's not to say that you won't see improvements in body composition. They are likely to come. But by having a very clear goal in fueling for your session, recovering from the session, what happens is that you build consistency and continuity in your training. And continuity in your training, both gym and pitch, will lead to you feeling stronger, being fitter, maintaining a higher level of intensity, higher level of volume. And the output of that, or the result of that, is better body composition. So, you're being clear about what your priorities are awful important. And if there's larger amounts of improvements required from a body composition perspective, it's beginning to that journey. And it's by beginning to put those really good practices in place, making small but consistent changes. And just to say, some of the biggest improvements in body composition that I would have seen over my time in professional or even amateur sport, was identifying what you described, off season or pre-season, and really going after that phase. And then recognizing the opportunity, seeing it as not an off season, but seeing it as an area to rest, to recover, but go after and goal set.
Yeah. To elaborate on that kind of small, and again, I'm thinking of someone coming into a leisure or a gym facility, and some of our people are working with an individual who they feel like it's meal skipping happening, or they're really going about things the wrong way, but maybe not sure how to have that conversation. Any kind of key start of points you would go after there to build that relationship and get to the root of what you think might be happening?
Yeah. Well, if somebody is coming into a leisure facility or a gym, they will have a goal in mind. And very often it could be body composition, but it could also be strength. And I have found an incredible correlation between people connecting with the idea of being stronger, putting a routine in place where there's a focus on strength, and an outcome of improvement in body composition, because people are thinking about becoming stronger. So if you think about skipping meals and you think about the nutrition components, if somebody is very clear that strength is a goal, then they need to have eaten, and they need a structure around their meals that's going to facilitate that. So like, there are simple things like, the obvious thing that you can do with somebody is to do a food diary. But if what you're trying to do is to get them to think more about their own practices. And my philosophy is a client-led approach, where I don't hand out I share nutrition principles and nutrition guides, but the whole framework is in order for people to, based off those principles and those guides, build out their own plans and build out their own understanding. So I'll be asking the question, if somebody performs really well in a training session or a workout, why? Very often it's because they've eaten breakfast, they've slept well, they're hydrated, and they're in a good place, right? If they aren't in a good place, or they're not getting most out of their training, why? And it's getting them to think about those reasons and come up with the reasons, the barriers, and the solutions.
Super. We've got a question in from Dermot. So Dermot's mainly working with older adults in nursing homes and local community groups. The advice on nutrition for older adults, any key tips?
Yeah, it's an area, again, of great personal interest, because I guess I'm a little bit older myself. My mom is a little bit older. Unfortunately, my dad isn't with me, but like, it's unbelievable if the person is interested in the space in any way at all. I'm not talking about the detail of nutrition, but if they can connect food and function, and that you can have that conversation about the value of food and function, then it's far easier to talk then about meal structure. Because what happens as we age, we tend to have lower production of certain hormones that maintain muscle mass and strength. So as we age, we lose that muscle, we lose that strength. And in order to limit that, Dermot, who's in this position, is trying to maintain function and maintain strength to prevent things like falls and fractures and things like that. So it's about being really practical around the nutrition information. So meeting energy requirements is a key one, adequate protein, and then if we can make sure that there's adequate vitamin D and omega-3, great. But it's the practical ways of doing that. And very often what older people need to do is to consume easier digested forms of those. So for example, I had my dad, he was using, he had his power shake every single morning when he got up. And my mum was the same. She uses whey protein now with some milk. She's not on the creatine, but I actually had my dad on creatine as well to help him maintain higher levels of function. We're kind of going into the detail of it, but that's to kind of give you a little bit more context.
And I think that's something I see myself. I have someone close to me who, again, limited mobility now, and the energy requirements aren't the same, and not a huge appetite for the protein and muscle growth. It's a constant battle, isn't it?
It is, yeah, no, it is. And if you're not if you're not hungry, it's really really hard to get people to eat, and it has to be enjoyable as well. So the diversity in the flavors is so important. Can you give me 1 second? I just want to let some air in. 1 second.
Yeah, go for it. Again, guys, feel free to pop any questions in you have, and we'll break throughout. Okay, Daniel, I think we're good to push on.
This might stimulate a bit more conversation. Do we need to count calories? And then if I was in front of you, or if I could, I'd create a poll, because this is probably more controversial than it should be. The answer, of course, is that it depends. It depends on the margins, it depends on the person, and it depends on the person's goal. But do we need to count calories? Most often we don't. And we need to ask people about their behaviors. You mentioned routine, Alan. Routine structures and what they've got put in place to meet the fundamental requirements of nutrition. So most of the time, what I'll see is inconsistency in eating patterns. Overconsumption of processed foods is the easiest one. So if you deal with structure, routine, and people begin to meet the fundamental needs that they have, the structures and the routines begin to fall into place. So are there circumstances where you can find tracking highly beneficial and educational? Yes. What I and in that situation, it's about understanding the need for protein, and it's a very simple way of seeing and assessing, where your calories are, where your nutrients are. What I would often see is an underappreciation of food quality and an overemphasis on the numbers, and a lack of depth in how the food makes you feel. And the other, if I go back to my philosophy around the preparation of food and the knowledge around food and what makes people feel good. So the holistic approach, this can be a part of it, but we have to be, we cannot use this tool for every single person who comes into us. And very often the first thing I need to do with people who are coming in and who are tracking consistently is to try and get them to be more confident without it. Because the question you'll ask somebody is like, do you actually want to track for the rest of your life? Like, is that what you want to do? And people feel a real lack of confidence in how they approach their nutrition without having it as a backup tool. It's a bit of an overview. Is there another question there, Alan?
No, I think Dermot just, again, he said he found the idea of connecting food and function particularly helpful.
Okay, good.
And getting people motivated and on board. Yeah.
Okay, very good. So, when I did a bit of research around this, something that came up, and I'd see it a lot in my one-to-ones, but something that definitely came up is this idea of counting calorie, but also fitness tracking in association with eating disorder or disordered eating. And the other thing that I've seen as well is anxiety associated, or data anxiety from wearable technology. And I've seen that more specifically, again, I've seen people using things like Whoop, overanalyzing the data and basing an awful lot of your decisions on the data that you're seeing. And I go back to this question all the time. How do you feel? How did it feel? How did it make you feel? And that question, even though it's so powerful, is almost redundant, because we want to see what our GPS data looks like. We want to see how many calories we've burned on the machine, or we want to see how many calories we've burned on our watch. And I think what it does is it just makes us think an awful lot more robotically about information rather than actually having a better sense of, exercise is making us feel good. Last night I didn't sleep well, but I actually don't feel too bad, rather than it saying, your sleep or your recovery is at 17%. There's a case that we do allow or deal with the circumstance that we're in, but we use the data to make better decisions. And it's like, it's the routines, and it is the behaviors and the knock-on effect on our behaviors that really matter when we consider how we're living and how all this information plays into our goal, because I think we can become a bit of a slave to that information. So I want to kind of switch the gears a little bit. Just it's important to give a bit of context to some of the more specific things that do make a difference. And when I'm dealing with a client and you want to start with a specific nutrient, protein is usually the simplest, because it's easy to measure and it doesn't change. So for any given individual, what you want to try and get to is above 1.7 grams of protein per kg of body mass. And if you're working in the fitness industry, you're already familiar with protein. You're already familiar with its value. And then it's just, how do you communicate how people can implement it practically? But I think giving people the context around things like quality, total intake, protein distribution, and where the gaps are in their life, that's an effective way of going about it. Also, you probably heard me say this, how did you feel question about 10 times. How did it feel to have 20-30 grams of protein from your eggs and toast this morning, or your protein-based smoothie, or your yogurt and porridge? How did it feel when you got up there versus something that's just pure carbohydrate, or it isn't a mixed meal approach? It allows you to build in a little bit more understanding of its value. And protein is everywhere, but just to I guess to emphasize is there's a big range in the way that we can consume protein. There's a range in the quality and what we can consume. You've got everything from milk in its own form to you add cultures to make yogurt, and that can come in tubs to pouches. And then you've got protein milks, and generally, I'm sure that people who are listening on already know some of these things, but fresh cow's milk and the processing of fresh cow's milk it's just so widespread in the diet and within food products and the general food industry now. It crosses so many areas, from child or infant nutrition right up to nutrition for older adults. And if you break down its components, what do we have? We have fat, we have the skim, we have lactose, which is the sugar. So we've got milk protein, which comes in the form of whey and comes in the form of casein. Then you've got skimmed milk powder, and to make the protein milk, a lot of milks have milk protein powder added back into it because it mixes well, and it's a very simple way of adding more protein to the protein milk. It's interesting, milk in its purest form is still if I'm thinking about performance and I'm thinking about recovery, it's still my preferred way to consume milk. And you've got skimmed, low fat, and whole. And of course, we've got all these different dairy alternatives, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But I think if you understand just the value in its whole form, but also in its constituents, it is an incredibly powerful food. My dad, of course, he's biased. He was a farmer, and worked in the dairy industry. But he used to talk about it being one of the most complete foods because of its combination of carbohydrate, protein, and fat, and all of its key nutrients. But it is remarkable, absolutely remarkable, how far. I'm not even talking about the production of cheeses and things, that milk can be developed into, how many different products that it can be developed into. When we think about milk and health, it's a fascinating one because there's so much controversy around milk, and there's so much contradiction. And there's so much misinformation around milk. It's very easy to find a lot of misinformation. But in very simple terms, milk is something that everyone can consume as long as you don't have an allergy or you're not lactose intolerant. There are some people who are sensitive to milk, and that manifests. And it's not well understood, but it does manifest in some skin irritation or skin conditions. It's rare, but it does happen. But by and large, well over 90% of people can consume milk, and it has a very positive overall impact on your health. Everything from the fermented milks, from a yogurt perspective, in how it impacts your gut, the provision of key nutrients, it as a recovery meal. So just a quick look at the research is that it's not inflammatory. It's actually it actually has anti-inflammatory properties. And there's many new policies across the world that now are looking, if you see down what I've highlighted here, is the consistent associations between fermented milk consumption and reduced risk of cancer, colorectal cancer, type 2 diabetes, improved weight maintenance, and improved cardiovascular health, bone, gastrointestinal health. The association exists between prostate cancer occurrence and dairy consumption. That was the only thing that there was something to take note. There's not significant research, but there's an association, very, very small. The article argues that yogurt and fermented milk products provide favorable health outcomes beyond milk. And these products are made, consumption of these products should be encouraged as part of national dietary guidelines. So really strong. Okay, let's take another question. I think another question came in there, Alan. Let's take a question.
Yeah, Dermot's back onto his. Suppose he's asking around: is there a risk involved for athletes if you consume too much milk or other dairy products because of the saturated fat content?
So saturated fat is not created equal. It's made up of different acids, and the saturated acid, the particular type of fat or acid that's made up of more processed meats is considered to have a greater role in cardiovascular disease than within dairy products. Now, cheeses can be a little bit more of a concentrated form, but when it comes to milk, there isn't really a major association. And by and large, you would have to be consuming very large volumes of milk. And so one piece of research where anything up to about a litre is considered safe or beneficial. But it's like then we start looking at the actual context. So within your calorie range, if somebody consumes 1.5 liters of milk and you're still within your calorie range, well, then there's absolutely no concerns with the consumption of milk. I have, on the rare occurrence, seen where athletes consume too much milk. They're drinking milk at every meal, which led to excess calorie consumption, which led to excess body fat. And in those circumstances, a bit of more common sense approach is needed. But in terms of the fat content in milk, I don't see any major risk within moderate volumes. Yes.
No, that's great. Do you want to maybe just touch on, you had mentioned it previously, or for anyone maybe unsure, around the whole milk, skim milk, full fat milk?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Skim milk, ultimately, when you think about skim milk, no fat, skim milk no fat or 0%, then half fat or low fat is about 2%, and then whole is 3.5. The difference is so little, particularly between low and whole. And if I come back to it again, if you're talking about general health, most of the time it comes down to personal preference. Like, I'm going to give very practical insight to the way that I live. Whole milk and coffee and porridge and cooking and different types of recipes. Personal preference, half milk for drinking. And then skim milk. I don't actually buy skim milk, but I did when I was playing sport, and that was purely for performance purposes, because it's easier to deal with larger volumes of milk in that form, because the fat can sometimes be a challenge during, from a digestion point of view for exercise and digestion. But in terms of overall health, there's very little difference. Yes, by taking a lower fat, you can reduce the amount of calories, but again, that only matters if you're consuming very large volumes of milk. Is there anything specific, Alan, that you wanted me to address in that?
No, that's it. Just the difference, I suppose, anyone unsure of the pros and cons.
Yeah, I think just, I suppose, moving on, we are heavily influenced, and conversations are heavily influenced now by what we see online. And, I think Netflix, you don't need any nutrition qualifications, or you don't need any health bodies to approve the production of these documentaries, driven very often by agenda. And it's not that to say that all the information is inaccurate, but the way that information is skewed, I generally don't even watch a lot of these documentaries, but I get a lot of questions about them. It's great that there's a diversity has emerged in how we are looking at nutrition, and it's great that things like a plant-based approach where more plants are encouraged to be eaten, and that conversation has evolved is great. But the key consideration is that better for health? That absolutely is it is unfounded to say that one is better than the other. It's about being able to use a more of an evidence-based approach, but allowing for personal preference in the way that people want to eat. And then the meat question, there's a lot of misinformation around meat, and then all meats just being pulled together. There's a massive difference between something that you're going to pick up, a processed meat that you're going to pick up, the high amount of saturated fat, and then something that you go to the butcher to get, where it's a lean cut of meat and you're cooking it at home at moderate temperatures, and it's not being burnt, and it's being cooked with other vegetables, and it's been cooked with a good quality oil compared to cheaper oils, that are more likely to be inflammatory. And it's the same around, it's the same around the misconceptions with eggs. Eggs, perfectly nutritionally balanced food. How many eggs we can eat a day? Believe it or not, there is no 100% general scientific consensus around this, but certainly 2 eggs is a relatively safe way to approach eggs. Some people can eat 20 eggs and makes no difference to their cholesterol. But also understanding that cholesterol is produced from an overall approach to how we live our lives, our genetics, our nutrition, and the consumption of cholesterol directly from eggs has no impact on cholesterol and on blood levels of cholesterol. So it's just about this. It's very easy to get stuck in the weeds when it comes to our nutrition. But if we take what we call a bird's eye and a eagle eye, worm's eye and eagle eye, bird's eye approach to our nutrition, trying to zoom out to what is sustainable and what can we achieve in the longer term, and what do we need to focus on as our key priority. And if we create a really good clarity on what good looks like for us, so this is a question again I use all the time: what does good look like for you? Are you clear on that? Because most often people don't know. They don't know what good looks like for them in the way that they live their lives. Best for when we can implement it, best for when we can implement it, good as consistently as we can possibly be, but you need to understand what that looks like and recognize that if you're operating between good and best, you're in a very, very, very good position. So this is a very simple overview. When we think about exercise, we think about risk of disease. The more active that you are, the more active that you are, the lower the risk for disease, but also the higher your calorie needs. So Joe and Anne are in very different circumstances, live in very different lives with very different risk for lifestyle-related disease. And what you're trying to get people to think about is how they should implement key habits and routines based on the way that they live their life and where the opportunity is. So it's a very simple approach to building in more consistency, but giving context to that. I'm conscious of time here, Alan. I don't think I'm a third through my slides here, so I might take it. Is there any other questions there?
That's all coming for the moment. We might try and wrap by 1:15, maybe. Is that be fair?
Yeah, I think what I'll do, just I'll summarize the last two slides in saying that I was going to present, and it is that I present that exercise pyramid. It's probably 40 years old. Everybody has heard of the food pyramid. Nobody really knows about the exercise pyramid. And it's unbelievable how much people think about exercise in the context of structured physical activity. And I know in your space, you're out there and you're encouraging general movement, but it isn't just about the sets and reps. And I'm not making any assumptions about what your delivery is, but bringing as much awareness as we possibly can. Everybody who's here listening to this, as much awareness as we possibly can to the value of day-to-day movement. I work with so many people who have no structured physical activity in their lives. And you're trying to get them to live their life by being more active and finding ways to do it. So the next thing I'm going to talk to you about is what our own philosophy here at Davey Nutrition is building really good clarity through phases, and we have had extraordinary success. So the last 2 years, we've had seven different Empower programs. The average length of the program is about 10 weeks. So we've had hundreds of people through a very, very simple process of working through what those priorities are. And in phase one, what's holding you back? So what are the big things that are influencing your decisions and your consistency? And it's a much slower approach, much slower approach. And we don't talk consistently about the results that you feel, but what we get people to do is to buy into a process around everything that I've talked about so far. Improving the consistency of your meal structure, targeting protein earlier in the day, trying to understand what influences your decisions, building in more planning and organization. We do not get stuck in the weeds about any topic. None. We're never split hairs in how we approach things. We just ask people to build out really clear routines and structures that they know that they can maintain. What do we see? We see that the results look after themselves and people focus on the process. So skills improve, education improves, consistency improves. So over the course of each one of our programs, we see improvements in the quality of food choices that people make, the way that people perform in their exercise, their 5Ks, football, and in their sleep. And the byproduct of that is that the Empower program is predominantly fat loss. We do have performance ones, but the most we've ran as fat loss is that people achieve weight loss. And here's the most important point. We emphasize, where are you going to be a year later? And that is our measure of success. So we'll be in touch with people a year later to see, I'm still implementing this. The number one piece of feedback we get, it's not that I don't have challenges. It's not that there are times where I fall off the wagon. It's that I'm not off the wagon for too long. It's that the period of time that there's instability in my lifestyle is way shorter now. And that's what we're looking for, because life is hard. So if you can put people into these stronger positions by having these conversations with them, changing their mindset to things that they can focus on and be consistent with, and understand what's influencing their decisions, can be really powerful. So the accountable behaviors, really focusing on the self-talk and what allows to build in traction. What are all of the things that are allowing you build consistency and move towards your goal versus what is a distraction? Very often, the most common distraction is what somebody else is doing down the road in a running group, another team member. It's your journey. All of your energy needs to be focused on how you are feeling. And the better that you get at that, the better that you will understand the decisions day to day that impact you. So if we look at the simplest messages, if I go back to the 5-a-day rule, if we look at the number of people, like Ireland is considered one of the top countries, and yet 33% of adults only reach this target. 48% are reaching between 1 or 4 portions of fruit and vegetables daily. There's so much room for improvement on such a basic level that you can have a conversation with a 5-year-old about. So, we are consistently good at complicating key messages, but when we clarify what should be in our cupboards and our kitchens, and we create systems and we create routines that we can stick to, it allows us to be far more consistent in how we work towards our goal. So this is one of the simplest tools that I use with every single client. Where they take this, they can go as consistent, they can take it as detailed as you possibly want. But look at your week. When do you train? When are you meeting friends? When you've got your own time? When are you planning, and when are you preparing? When are you reviewing? And you can make this as detailed as you want, but this will set you up. This allows you to build and evolve. It allows you to build in a better understanding of what works and what doesn't. And as I said, you can break Monday down into each hourly slot if you want, but this is where it starts. Having a preview and a review process, and that allows to build in far more consistency. So what do? You focus on the simple things around sleep structure, and go into mindfulness, planning, organization, hydration, food shopping. So it's these type of things and these type of conversations had regularly and consistently. I was getting my eyes tested last week, and I complimented the woman who did my eye test and how comfortable and how informative the session was. And she said, the way that I think about this and the way that I regularly discuss what we do with younger people in younger optometrists is that this is the biggest thing in a person's day. This is the thing that they're going home. This is what they're thinking about. And I think it's a very powerful way to think about what you do, because the training session or the meeting that you have with a client is likely to be the most significant thing. And it is their time to focus on them. It's about allowing that conversation to happen and understanding the value of that conversation. I'm going to skip this slide and to focus on it isn't about you. And the more that you become comfortable with that, not about your knowledge, it's not about your skills or how great you look, the more that you can think about what it's like in that client's shoes, the more impact that you're going to have on them. The more impact that you have on them, the more benefits that they will feel in their lives. And ultimately, if you're running a business, the more people will speak about your support. And that's what we like in what we do to really differentiate ourselves. So if you speak with us, we listen. You have our full contact. The only other thing I wanted to say that I feel just in terms of social media and the delivery of messages is that it's really hard to be yourself. It's really hard to understand being yourself, but knowing that philosophy, you go back to it again, knowing what message you want to deliver, people really buy into that. So people like to know who you are, and you're more likely to work with people and get buy-in if they like who you are and if they trust you. So that's how you can build a community of people that know who you are, like who you are, and trust you. So it's building up the consistency in that message. And that's who you want to engage with, people who want to buy into your process. And also, when I talk about, because I have acceptance and I have expectations, I think it's good to be honest with people when it comes to a timeline for things. I tell this story quite a bit. I tore cartilage in my knee now 2 years ago. I, for some reason, thought I'd be back in a couple of weeks. That's 2 years. It took 18 months to really get back in a position where I had a decent level of function. But nobody really told me that sometimes these injuries can take that long. And I think we're not honest enough with people about what, the commitment that's required. And I think that honest conversation is important. Creating good clarity on what can be achieved through those different phases, as Alan and I talked about. When's the best time to go after body composition? When's the best time to focus on strength? And what are all the actions then that are associated with that? But we overestimate what we can accomplish, in a day, but greatly underestimate what we can accomplish in a year. And that's it. For anyone who doesn't know me, Daniel Davey, daveynutrition.com is our website. We have some nutrition courses and programs. And if you ever want to send me a message, please do. And to those people who stayed on, I'm going to not count you, Alan, but those 12 people, thanks very much. And for everyone who listened and engaged, or anyone who watches this, thank you. This is something, this is a space that I care deeply about, and I hope that came across. And every single day, I am thinking about how to be more effective as a practitioner and a leader in the space. And I think that if you adopt that type of approach and think about it from the person's perspective that you're meeting and seeing where they are on their journey, the better you understand where they are and how you can prioritize with them, the more that you can impact them. Thank you. And I am happy to take some questions if there are any.
Thanks, Daniel. I know we can go down rabbit holes here when we get someone to conversation, the time gets away from us, but I think that's good as well, that we could stay talking for ages. Just if anyone else wants to pop in a query before we finish up.